Conditional formatting allows you to format the contents or the format a cell differently depending on what's in that cell or in other cells. The best way to show you is with some examples. So here, for example, we've got some revenue growth, and these are the growths in different branches. We want to have anything that's, let's say, less than 10% turn red, let's say above 30% it must turn green, and anything between must be yellow. So we could do it manually, but what that means is next month we're going to have to manually redo it again, and we continually need to check. So what we should be able to do is I can highlight those cells, I go to the Home tab, Conditional Format. Now the actual tool is down here, New Rule and Manage Rules, but you'll see there's some wizards which help us do certain standard things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say if it's greater than 30%, we want it to turn green. So I'm going to click on greater than. You'll see Excel guesses 15%. We're going to just change that and make it 30%. So it's going to say that any cell that is greater than 30% is going to be formatted, and Excel has guessed light red full with dark red text. You can see there's some standard colorings, but we're going to go to the custom format, and this is your normal format cells. So you'll see you can change the number categories, you can play with some font items, you can mess around with the border, and the most common one is we can fill it with a color. So I'm going to say turn it green please. So when I say OK, you'll see it automatically turns it green, and if I say OK, that one is automatically turned green. If I want to add another one on, so now we want between, let's say 10 and 30% must be yellow. Again, the cells are highlighted. I go back to Conditional Formatting, highlight cell rules, and you'll see one of the options is between. So I'm going to say between. Excel guesses again. So I'm going to say between 10% and 30%. Again, it's going to use light red full with dark red text. I could use yellow. That's what it looks like. Or I'm going to go to custom and choose that yellow there. So OK. So we've now added 2 conditional formats on. I'm going to add a third one. I'm going to say highlight cell rules. You'll see the option here is less than. I'm going to say less than 10%. And this one, I'm going to make it red. So when I say OK, what we've now got is 3 conditional formats on these cells. The benefit of conditional formatting is if it turns out that that's not 21% but actually 2.1%, when I click enter, you'll see it turns red because that is below 10% and it knows it must turn red in that case. Just before we continue and show you some of the other things you can do, I just want to show you what's actually happening here. So I'm going to highlight those cells again, go to Home, Conditional Format, and at the bottom here you'll see it says Manage Rules. So when I click on it, it will show you all the conditional formats you have either on the current selection, what we've selected, or there's a couple of other options here. For each of these, you can click on them. You'll see you can delete, you can edit, or you can create a new rule. You can move them up or down. So if I go here and I say edit rule, you'll see this pops up, quite similar, maybe not as user-friendly as the wizard, but it should be clear to you. So you can see it says cell value, less than, and all of these things you can change, and you can change the number. Just going back to what you can do from the wizard's point of view. With these, we actually typed in the numbers, but maybe what we want is the color to change based on a number in another cell. So here, this benchmark is gross profit of 30%. I want these to turn green if they're bigger than that, or red if they're less than that. So the process is pretty similar. Home, Conditional Formatting, highlight cell rules, the one I want is greater than. And now instead of typing this in here, I can go and just click on that cell. So what Excel is now going to do is compare the contents of these to whatever's in there. This time I'm going to use the green fill, and when I say OK, these all turn green because they're bigger than 30%. If we now change it and maybe it needs to be bigger than 34%, you'll see automatically only those two get the green coloring because the benchmark has changed. Let's just change that back to 30%. Another thing you can do, I'm going to highlight those. You'll see we've looked at most of these, greater than, less than, between, etc. You can see we've got an option of text that contains, date occurring, and duplicate values. There's also a whole bunch of top and bottom rules, so you can highlight the top 10 items, top 10%, bottom, etc. You can also highlight the above average. So when I click on above average, it asks for what color you're going to use. I'm going to say, so we're happy with the red because this is operating expenses to revenue, so we want to, these are bad. When I say OK, what Excel has done is looked at those cells, got an average, and then anything that's above averaged is colored. So if, for example, this number changes to 29%, you'll see it adjusts the average and then highlights those. Just looking here, so we've looked at the top and bottom rules. If you want, there's always a more rules option, so you can click on it, and this goes through the actual tool where you can now choose a whole selection of items. So those are the standard ones, these up here. There are a couple of others. So let's look here. I've got a whole bunch of data, it goes downwards, and we want to somehow show which time is the biggest item here. And you can see it's quite hard to see, to spot perhaps that that is the biggest. If I highlight these cells, I go to conditional formatting, there's something called data bars. And the easiest way to show you is just to click on it, and when I click on it, you can see that what it's doing is showing me what is putting a little bar chart within the cell. So it's very easy to spot that that one over there is the biggest, that's the second biggest. So visually it's a lot easier to spot, and if these change, then the bar charts change as well. Similarly, here we've got a mortgage repayments. So there's a matrix here of how long do we get to pay it off, what's the interest rate. We now want to easily see where the biggest and smallest numbers are. I can highlight it. If I go to conditional formatting, there's something called color scales. Again, a whole bunch of options. I'm going to choose the second one. When I click on it, you can see what it's doing is it's coloring the cells from darkest red to darkest green, and then a whole bunch of colors in between depending on the size of the number, and in this case it's going through yellow. So you can see it's a lot easier to spot where the cheapest is and where the most expensive is. Finally, you've got a whole bunch of icons. So just to show you here, I've got a whole bunch of projects, and this is how complete the projects are. Visually, it might be easier to show some sort of a graphic. So if I go to conditional formatting, under icon set, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different icons. You can have arrows, robots, ticks and crosses, cell phone signals, and the one I want to look at here is this one here, which is sort of a percentage project complete. So for now I'm going to just click on that, and what you'll see, it immediately puts in the correct icon depending on what it thinks these numbers represent. I'll explain to you this a little bit later of how it's coming up with this and how you can adjust it. Risk rating, so these are the risks of these projects. We want to use the robots, red, yellow, green. I go to conditional formatting, icons, and you'll see there's some robots. When I click on them, you'll see we've got that. Now these risk ratings, we're going to want to change this around. The bigger the number, the bigger the risk. So I'm going to show you how to do that just now. But that's how simple it is to add colors onto these cells, and they'll automatically do it when the numbers change. Now let's understand how Excel has decided what should be red, yellow and green, and what should be filled in here. In the first part, it was very explicit. You specified exactly what you wanted to see, and the colors were done. When it came to these labels, the color matrix and the icons, Excel has to do some guesswork. So if I just highlight these, go to conditional formatting, and I look at manage rules, what you'll see, I'm going to go to the data bars one and say edit. This is how Excel has decided what these should look like. So you'll see the format style is do you want a data bar, an icon set, etc. Notice you can decide whether you want to show the bar only. So do you want to see these numbers or not? If I say show bar only, you'll see you don't see the numbers. They're still there, but you don't see them. I'm just going to put it back on so we can actually see them. You'll see then it specifies how do we know what the minimum is and what the maximum is. Excel has decided to automatically guess that the minimum bar is automatic, but I can say, well, actually no, minimum must be the lowest value, for example, or a certain number, or a certain percent. So if I go to lowest value, when I say OK, you'll see it changes slightly, and what it's decided is the lowest value it sees over here is going to be the very smallest bar. If I go here and I choose that the maximum is the highest value, when I say OK and apply, this one here fills the entire bar. This may not be what you want though, so maybe you want to specify that a certain percent must be the highest value and a certain percent must be the lowest value. This is a bit confusing in Excel, so we're going to explain that just now. So that's that one there. If I come down here, highlight these, manage rules, edit, you'll see this is slightly different. So now what it's saying is, what is your style? Is it a 2-color or 3-color scale? Notice you can decide yourself how the color should work. So you can choose any color, through any color, to any color. And again, you can decide how does it determine the minimum color. So what's going to turn this green? Is it the lowest value, a number, percent, etc.? The midpoint. So at the moment it's saying look at the middle of these two, that'll be the yellow, but you may want to specify a certain number. So if I say the number is the midpoint, and let's say I decide that this bright yellow must be, let's choose that number there, 9347, 9347, highest value, that's fine. When I say OK, just watch what happens to that. You'll see it now adjusts this color scheme so that this is yellow. The best way, however, to understand all of this is actually with the icons. So let's just start with the risk rating. So firstly, you can see this is going the wrong way. The lowest number should be green. So firstly, I'm going to go and highlight it. Manage rules, edit. So what you'll see now, again, you can specify the icon. What are you using? An icon set. Notice there is a reverse icon order. So notice it goes green, yellow, red. When I click reverse, now it's going red, yellow, green. So if I said OK and applied it, so that's already a lot better. It's reversed it. then you'll see it tries to explain to you it's going to turn red when the value is bigger than or equal to 67%. Now you've got to be a little bit careful here. This word percent is not the same as that there, the percent there. This is actually more percentile. So you'll see it saying it must turn red when the value is bigger than or equal to 67%. This effectively is looking at the smallest number, the biggest number, working out the difference between the two, and then the top 67% of it will turn red. If we decide, for example, that there's a set number, so we've decided that only when it's above 90% do we want it to turn red. The way we tell Excel that is we're going to say turn red when the value is bigger than or equal to. I'm going to change this percent to rather say number, and I'm going to type my percentage in there, because remember, percent is actually just a number, 0.90. I'm then going to say I want it to be yellow, so let's be extreme and say anything from that 90% all the way down to 10%. So I'm going to say, again, I need to change that to number. So it must be yellow when it's less than 0.9. Notice it automatically put it in. And bigger than or equal to 10. So just make sure that's a number. Oh, sorry. So you'll see that it had automatically then adjusted its calculation so that it'll be red when it's bigger than 90%, yellow when it's less than whatever the red one is, but bigger than 10%, and green when it's less than 10%. So there's no gaps here. When I say OK and apply, you'll see now I've controlled how that works. Same thing with project completion. Excel has guessed, so you'll see that 39% is showing as not really done at all, which doesn't make sense to me, and this is because by default Excel uses this percentage, and in its terminology 39% is the smallest number, 95% is the biggest number, so that's finished, that's not finished, it's not even started, and then these are adjustments of it. But what I would say is perhaps we want to link it. So there's 5 items, so let's do it in gaps of 20%. So I'm going to say that must be a number, 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 number. So it's going to be 0.8, 0.6, 0.4, 0.2. When I say OK and apply it, so this now makes more sense to me. That's just a quarter done, that's basically finished, that's a half done, etc. So with all the conditional formatting, you're able to edit it, and for the most part, it's fairly logical over here. In this example, we need to create conditional formatting. So for the first section, this section here, must follow these rules. So if the number is less than or equal to 10%, I want it to turn red. It must be yellow if it's bigger than 10% but less than 20%, and green if it's more than 20%. For this row here, we just want to highlight the above average cells. The solution to this example, for the first one, we highlight the cells, go to Home, Conditional Format. So the first thing we have to do is turn it red if it's less than or equal to 10. So if we go to Highlight Cell Rules, you'll see there's a less than option. Now that's not less than and equal to. So what I think I'm going to do is go to More Rules. And you'll see I can now specify that the cell value must be greater than, and we're going to look for less than or equal to. Now I'm going to put 10%, and the format we're going to use is that the full must be red. So I'm So okay. So that's the first one done. Now we want to add another one. Between 10 and 20 it must be yellow. So I'm going to go to the wizard again. There is a between, so this time I'm going to choose that. I'm then going to say between 10% and 20%, and I want that to be, so I'm going to choose custom format, and will be yellow. So okay, and the last one we need to be is if it's bigger than 20% it must be green. So again we still highlight it here, highlight cell rules, greater than. I'm going to type in 20% and we custom format it to green. So when I say OK, it's now got that formatting. For the above average, very simple, you highlight it, conditional formatting. If we hover over here, it's not there, but if we go to top and bottom rules, you'll see there's an item called above average. We click on it. At the moment above average is good, so I don't like the red, so we'll make it green. When I say OK, we're done. In this example we want to easily see when is the biggest time for calling and when's the least, and it's quite hard when you look down here to spot that that one's 4 minutes and that one's 3 minutes. So we want data bars on these two. And then on the last one we want to use color scale, so we want to see green for the highest and red for the lowest, for example. The solution for this example, so the first thing we want to do is put data bars on. Now your choice is, you need to decide, do you want to include the grand total or not? We are going to exclude it because we don't want the grand total affecting things. Go to home, conditional formatting, data bars, and I'll choose that one, and when I click on it, it's immediately obvious where the big ones are. For the weekend we're going to do the same thing, conditional formatting, data bars, but just to make it a bit different we'll choose a different color, but again you can easily see the difference. And the last one is to use a color scale, so we'll highlight that, conditional formatting, color scale. You just need to decide if green is good or green is bad. So in this case we'll do green is good, and when we click on it you'll see it's automatically formatted so the highest number is green and the lowest numbers are red. In this example we've got a matrix, but it's quite hard to see where the biggest numbers are and the smallest numbers are. You pretty much have to work through each number to figure it out. So we want a color scale on this matrix, so that red is the biggest number and green is the smallest number. The solution to this example, we need to create a color scale, so we can highlight that area, go to home, conditional formatting, color scale, and what we've said is the biggest number is bad, so it's red, so I'm going to choose that one. When I click OK, you can now easily see where the bad numbers are and where the good numbers are, and you can trace the matrix back to see what conditions result in those numbers. For most of the conditional formatting options, the conditional formatting is based on the cells that you've highlighted. So if I highlighted those cells, Excel looks at each cell, what's in it, and then depending what's in it will make a decision on what the formatting should be. It might look at this and then compare it to something elsewhere, but it's always looking at that cell. There is another option though where you can set it up that these cells will change format not depending on themselves but on another cell. So for example here you'll see I've got ones, and what I want to happen is, depending if there's a 1 in here, I actually want this cell or this row to highlight. So the way to do that, we can highlight a number of cells, so perhaps I can highlight the whole lot. If I go to conditional formatting, all these options here work on what you've highlighted. So in order to do what we want to do here, we need to go the long route. We're going to say new rule. And you'll see right at the bottom, there's one that says use a formula to determine which cell to format. So what it's now doing is it's saying, okay, give a formula of some sort that will tell how we handle these cells. Now what's very important to realize is when you highlight an area like this, whatever you type in here is actually going to just cover the cell that's active. So when we set it up, we need to make sure that whatever happens here refers to that cell there. So in this case, what I'm going to say is that cell there, please go check if this cell over here is equals to a 1. So you'll see we've done that. You have to be a bit careful though, because notice that by default Excel puts the dollar signs on. So what this is now saying is that this cell must look there and see if it's a 1. But because this logic is going to be applied everywhere, for example, this cell over here, because of the dollar signs, is also going to look over there. That's not what we want. That cell should follow and look at that cell there. So we need to make sure that the dollar signs are representative. And in this case, what I'm going to say is it must always look in column A, but I'm going to remove the dollar signs from the 12 so that as it goes down, it keeps looking at the relevant row. This is normal. We go set a format and maybe let's make it yellow, for example. And when I say OK, you'll notice that these cells now are being driven not by what's in them, but rather by what's here. So if I needed this highlighted, I could put a 1 here, and you'll see that changes yellow. And if I remove that one, this one disappears. So you have the ability to look at other cells, but you must just keep in mind that when you highlight it, whatever you do is happening to that active cell, wherever it is. So if you go backwards and the active cell is here, you must build the formula as if you're referring only to that cell, and then think about the dollar signs and how it will affect where it goes and looks. In this example, we've got a big matrix of house prices and interest rates. We can afford between that much and that much. All we want to do is highlight all the combinations that are between those two numbers. The solution for this example, we highlight the area, go to Home, Conditional Formatting, highlight Cell Rules. You'll see there's an option there saying between. When we click on it, you'll see Excel guesses. We can type it in, or else I'm going to say it must be between whatever's in that cell or that cell. Just get rid of that. Just going to put an equal sign, so sometimes it can be a bit finicky. So let's rather do it that way. And then perhaps I'm going to make it green because those are the ones we can afford. If we're happy with that, we say OK. And you'll see it now highlights all the areas where we're between these two numbers. And we can change these two numbers and the formatting will change. In this example, we need to make these columns look exactly like this with the instructions here. So please read carefully what it's saying here, because we're just trying to show you how the percentages work in particular. The solution for this example, so the first one is we want to highlight those, and you can see we want it to turn red if it's less than 40%. Notice these are numbers. So when we refer to 40%, what we're saying is take the difference between the smallest and the biggest number, and the bottom 40% must turn red. So if it was up to 10, then those would be red, but you can see it needs to be a little bit further. So we've highlighted that. I'm going to go to the icons. I can choose the icons I want. Depending on your version, they do look slightly different. If I do that, you'll see it's close, but it's not quite right. So let's go to our manage rules and see what it's doing. And you'll see Excel has guessed that what you want is that it must be green when it's bigger than or equal to 67% of the range. You'll see here we want it to be 80%, so we need to just change that to 80. It then must be yellow between 40 and 80, so that 33 must change to 40. And when I say OK and apply, you'll see it's now correct. We're controlling what turns red, yellow, green. For the next one, we now want to be red if it's less than the absolute number 3, yellow, green, and you'll see we've chosen ticks, crosses, and exclamation marks. So again, I can highlight it. I'm going to go find the icon set, so it's that one there. When I click on it, Excel guesses and it decides that's how it's going to do it. You can see it's completely different. So let's go into manage rules, edit rule. So Excel has decided to use the percentage method, which means that it compares the numbers from the smallest to the biggest. In this case, we've got particular numbers we want to emphasize. So the first thing we do is we must change the type to be numbers, and then we can specify it. So green if it's bigger than 13. So notice not bigger than and equal to, but bigger than 13. Yellow when it's between 3 and 13, and red if it's less than 3. So I'm going to put a 3 there. So that looks about right. Okay, and apply it. And you'll see now it follows our rules. For the last one now, we want to be green if the number is bigger than whatever's in here, and red if it's less than. And note we don't have an option for what's equal to. So let's just go there, conditional formatting, go to the icons. You'll notice that my ups and downs is always the yellow option as well. So let's just choose that for now. Again, we need to go manage the rules. And you'll see Excel automatically does the percent. We're going to change it to a number and a number. And we're going to say be green when you're bigger than or equal to, and I'm going to link it to the cell here. Then it says be yellow when you're less than 0, whatever's in there, and we're actually going to link to the exact same thing. So we're going to say look there. When I say OK and apply, you'll see that this happens, and notice there's no yellow. And that's because the way conditional formatting works is if it's bigger than or equal to whatever's in there, the 14, it automatically turns green. Only if that's not true does it actually go to these other steps. So what you can do is, if I refer to the same reference point, it actually ignores this one. So then we've just got an up and a down. In this example, we've got a budget and an actual. We want to see what the variance is, but it's quite hard to see negatives and positives here. So what we want is colored arrows, green up if it's gone up, red down if it's gone down. The solution to this example, we highlight the variances, conditional format. We're going to put the icons on. We're going to use this one, the up, down, and orange. You'll see at the moment they all seem to be very red. The reason being is, notice that we've got a massive number here. By default, what Excel does is it uses the percent. And keep in mind, it's not the percent you see here. This percent looks at the smallest number, the biggest number, and refers to 67% of that range. So in this case, we actually want to change both of these to numbers, because remember, a percentage is actually just a number. And we're going to say it must be green when the value is bigger than or equal to 0, so I'm happy with that. When it's less than 0 or bigger than and equal to 0, so we're actually going to change this to be just bigger than, because we want it to do this when it's 0, and red when it's negative. apply it, and what you'll see now looks a bit better. The positives are green, zeros are orange, and reds are negative. In this example, we want to have a different type of shading so that when London, they get shaded, and the moment it changes to New York, it automatically gets shaded. So it should look something like the solution, like that, and it should be set up automatically so that if I change this to London, you'll see the shading changes. The solution for this example, so first thing we can do is we can highlight it. And what we know is we need to set up some sort of a formula so that this cell looks above itself, and if it's not the same thing, that entire row must be highlighted. So for example, it should do nothing here. When it gets here, it should realize that there's a different word above it, and therefore it needs to shade that one. So we've highlighted it. We're going to go to a new rule. We're going to use a formula. Now what we're going to do here is we actually are going to refer to ourselves. We're going to say, when you're in the cell, look at this cell, and is it not equal to that cell there? If we leave it like that though, all these cells, even the ones down here, are going to just compare those two. So we need to fix the dollar signs, and keep in mind that if I go to the right, if I put no dollar signs on, then it will compare these. So I always want it to look in column A, but the rows must change. So I'm going to get rid of the dollar signs there, get rid of the dollar signs there, and let's give it a format. So we'll maybe use a lighter shading. Let's see if that works. So okay, and what you can see it's done is this cell now checks there, sees it's different, and shades it. This cell here compares that cell to this cell. So this entire row now always looks to column A, but as it goes down, it looks down. And this means that if, for example, this actually was New York, when I type New York and I click enter, the shading changes, and it's a little bit easier to see where things change. In this example, what we want to easily be able to see is where these numbers change. So it's not, did you notice that these are all the same numbers, and then in July it drops similar here. So a lot of these numbers are changing. It's a little bit hard to see exactly where they change. So we want a conditional format that will automatically color the cell that has changed. So in this case, we need to set up a formula such that each cell will look at the previous cell. So this cell will compare itself to the previous cell. If it's different, it must give us a color. So let's just do this. I'm now going to just highlight it using my control button. So we've highlighted all of those. I'm going to say it's a new rule, formula based. You'll see if you look around, we have to build it as if we're in the cell that's active. So notice, even though I've highlighted those areas, I have to pretend I'm over here. So what I'm going to say is, look at this cell here. Are you different from the cell before? For example, that cell there. In this case, if I leave the dollar signs on, every cell will look at these two. So I need to go here, and I'm pushing my F4 key just to get that off. Let's put a format. Let's use a color here. And when I say OK, so you'll notice that it's done it. It looks like it's working. It's done all of these, but notice that this entire first column, because it's the first column and it's different from here, has been highlighted. You may want that, or perhaps you don't, in which case once you've set it up, highlight those, go to conditional formatting. You'll see under clear rules, there's a clear rules from selected cells or entire sheet. We're going to use selected cells, and you'll see you've now set it up that the conditional formatting only works from the second month onwards. In this example, we've got ones and twos indicating where an area has been mined or is available to mine. And you can see when you use numbers, it becomes very hypnotic, very hard to see where things are. So we'd rather want it like this, where it's shaded. So you need to use conditional formatting to make these shade depending on what's in here. The solution to this example, so we're going to highlight this. Now we want this cell to change color, not depending on itself, but rather what's in that cell. So we can't use one of the wizards. We're going to have to go to the new rule, choose to use a formula. And because that's the active cell, we're going to say that cell must look at that cell over there. Is it equals to 1? The dollar signs means that all these cells will look at that one. So we need to get rid of the dollar sign because we've set it up that that cell must look here, the next one must look at the next cell, etc. We can then set the format, and we can maybe put some shading on. So let's use maybe that one there for 1. When I say OK, you'll see immediately it's done it. We need to add another one on. So now when it's a 2, what must it do? So we put new rule again, use a formula, pretty much the same thing. We're referring to that cell, look at that cell there, remove the dollar signs. Is it equals to 2? If it is, what must the format be? We'll use maybe a thicker shading there, that one there. We say OK, OK. And you'll see fairly quickly now it's a little bit easier to see where there's stuff still available and where we have already mined. In this example, we've got our mine map. This shows us how many tons of the stuff we're looking for is available. You can see it gets quite confusing with all these numbers. This tells us what's mined and not mined already. So we first want to be able to see where all the good stuff is. So a color scale, just to see where the bigger numbers are. Then we also want to black out things that have already been mined. And then we just want to do some calculations here. The solution to this example, so first thing we'll do is highlight that. We're going to put a color scale on. Perhaps we'll use green, and what we want is the highest numbers to be dark green and the lowest to be a light green, or perhaps a yellow to make it a bit clearer. So we'll use that one there. Let's just check what Excel is doing with it. So it's saying the lowest value will be that color, the highest value that color, so that seems appropriate. The next thing we then need to do is to black out the areas that have already been mined. So wherever there's a 1, we want them to be blacked out. So in this case we need to use a new rule, use a formula. This is the cell that's been used, so we're going to say compare is that cell over there with no dollar signs equals to 1, because if that is the case, then we want it to black out. When I say OK, you'll see it now blacks out those, and notice that it overwrites the other formatting. Now we're asked to create a formula here that shows us how much ore is still available here. Now Excel doesn't really have a formula that can look here and say ignore the black cells, but remember the conditional formatting is based on a set of numbers. So I'm going to use a sum if. And what we're going to say is, please Excel, look at that area there. I'm going to leave, there's no dollar signs at the moment. What is it looking for? We want to know is what is available to us. So if it's a 2, it's available. So I'm going to type in here that the criteria is a 2. And what must it add up? Well, it mustn't add up that. We want to know how much of this is available. So I'll highlight that. When I say OK, you'll see the first one says 0 because we've mined it all. I can then copy it down, and each of these now is comparing what's available to here, and adding them up. The total all would have just added up all of that. And so what is the percentage remaining per level, let's say? It's going to be whatever's available divided by the total all. And you now have got not only an indicator of where all the good stuff is, but also per level how much is left over. In this example, we want to set up something similar to a Gantt chart. So you'll see here all dates, and we know that the start date and the end date for the land component is from the 1st of July to the 31st of July. So we want a conditional formatting to be built in, for example, in those two dates up to there, because that's land components, and then conditional formatting should disappear for that. But we also need to take into account that it's a bulk start and bulk end, internal start, internal ends, and these can overlap. So we need to be careful that we don't use a format type that can be either or. So a cell can either be one color or another. However, you can set up cells that are one color but shaded slightly differently and have borders that are different. So you can, by clever use of that, you can create something where, for example, you can see the green shading is the land, the lines are the bulk, and the internals are the red borders. So you can see more than one thing on one particular cell if they overlap. The solution to this example, now because we're going to do a between here, it's useful to know that there's no function in Excel that does between. However, we can make use of an AND function to create a between. And because of the way we've set it up, this is going to require formulas. So let's just go up to here. So I'm highlighting all of those. Conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula. And what we need Excel to do is to check, is this bigger than or equal to the start date, and is that same one less than or equal to the end date, because then we want it to shade. So in Excel there's a function called AND. And what we're going to say is look at that cell there, and keep in mind that I want to be able to copy it down. So I'm going to put my dollars on the 7, and is that either bigger than or equal to whatever you see in here. And in this case I'm going to now tell it to stay on column B. So I put the dollar signs on B, put a comma, we tell it again, look at that on a 7, is it less than or equal to whatever you see in the second one, put the dollars on C. So hopefully that will do it. So we're saying, look here, is that bigger than or equal to what you see there, and less than or equal to that. Let's format it, use a green shading. When I say OK, you can see that it looks like it's got it right. So if we just visually, up to the 29th of July it's turned green. Here, when we're in August, it's no longer doing the land component. So that's the first component we've added. We're now going to add the bulk. As mentioned, I cannot now have another color because a cell can either be one or other color. It can't be both. So when I highlight this, we're pretty much going to do the same thing. It's going to be a new rule. We're going to use a formula. We're going to use an AND formula. We're going to say, look there, dollar signs only on the rows. Is it bigger than or equal to? Now it must be the bulk. And put the dollar sign so it's on the D, comma, dollar signs on the 7. Is it less than or equal to whatever we see there, dollar signs on the E. When I format it, however, I can't use a fill because a cell can't be two different colors. So this time I'm going to use a style, and maybe we'll use these straight lines here. When I say OK and OK, you can now see that there is a slight overlap, which makes sense. Land is from the 1st to the 31st, but bulk starts a little bit earlier on the 15th. So there are overlaps. It allows for overlaps, but you can see that both at the same time. Lastly, we want to show internals. So I'm just going to highlight that area again. So again, pretty much exactly the same thing. New rule, formula equals and open bracket. Look at that, but only look at row 7. Is it bigger than and equal to what we see here? But only look at column F, comma, look at that, row 7 less than or equal to what's in there, column G. And when I format it, so now I've done a fill, I've done a pattern. So now we can go to the border, and maybe what I'll do is I'm going to have a red border. So I'm going to set it up that when we're in those dates, the border turns red. And you'll see it's now showing those items, and you can see the internals 1st of August to 30th of September. So all of those up to the 30th of September. Benefit of this now is if for whatever reason someone accidentally types 5th of July in here, the colors will change, and perhaps you'll know that it's impossible to do that before you've done the other step. So you can now use it and have some overlaps.